Have you ever seen someone's entire world crumble in the span of 3 seconds? Picture this. A military captain, known as the toughest guy on base, physically throws what he thinks is a rookie across a lunch table in front of hundreds of soldiers. The room goes dead silent. Say stands up, brushes mashed potatoes off her sleeve, and pulls something from her pocket that makes every single person in that cafeteria forget how to breathe. What happens next? Let's just say the captain learned the hardest lesson of his entire career, and you're about to witness every excruciating second of it. The lunch hall was packed that afternoon. You know the scene, right? Metal trays clanging against tables, groups of soldiers laughing too loud, trying to forget about the brutal training session they'd just survived. The smell of reheated food mixed with sweat and exhaustion hung in the air like a fog. Everyone wore the same sand-colored uniforms. Everyone looked equally tired, and everyone was trying to enjoy the 1 hour of peace they'd get all day. Then she walked in. Nobody really noticed her at first. She was dressed in standard tactical gear. Nothing flashy, nothing that screamed pay attention to me. She grabbed a tray, got her food, and started scanning the room for somewhere to sit. But there was something different about her. While every other soldier in that room carried themselves with either cockiness or exhaustion, she had this quiet, almost eerie calm, like she'd seen things that would make most people wake up screaming, but somehow she'd made peace with it. That's when Captain Harlan spotted her. Now, let me tell you about this guy. Harlan was the kind of officer who thought volume equaled authority. He had shoulders that could barely fit through doorways, a voice that could rattle windows, and an ego that filled whatever room he walked into. He'd built his entire reputation on being the hardest, meanest, most uncompromising commander on base. And honestly, most people were terrified of him. Elobid thrived on it, actually. When he saw this woman walking past his table, quiet and composed like she belonged there, something in him couldn't resist. It was like a reflex. He leaned back in his chair with that trademark smirk of his, the one that said, "I am about to make someone else day miserable and I am going to enjoy every second of it." Well, he drawled, making sure his voice carried across half the cafeteria. "Looks like we got ourselves a lost rookie. Hey, sweetheart, mess hall's for personnel, not visitors. You might want to check the guest entrance." The entire table erupted in laughter. His crew always laughed at his jokes. They at too. But here's the thing. She didn't react, didn't even look at him. Just kept walking with that same calm, Maserate pussy. And when she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, but somehow cut through all the noise, like a blade. "I have clearance to be here, sir." That's all she said. Then she kept moving toward an empty table in the far corner. Now, for most people, that would have been enough. She'd acknowledged him with respect, called him sir, and moved on. But Harlan, he wasn't most people. The fact that she'd barely given him a second glance, that she'd had the audacity to just walk away while he was talking, that sent something primal through his brain. His smirk disappeared. His face went red, and suddenly, this wasn't funny anymore. This was about dominance, about showing everyone in that room who was in charge. "Hold up!" he barked, his chair scraping against the floor as he shot to his feet. "You don't walk away when I'm talking to you." The cafeteria got quieter. People were starting to sense that this wasn't just Harlan being Harlan. This was something else. He crossed the distance between them in 4 heavy strides, his boots hitting the floor like war drums. Everyone could feel what was coming. That tension when you know someone is about to cross a line but you're powerless to stop it. What happened next lasted maybe 2 seconds, but everyone who witnessed it will remember it for the rest of their lives. Harlan grabbed her arm. Not gently, not as a gesture. He grabbed her with force, spun her around, and shoved her backward onto a nearby table. Her tray went flying. Mashed potatoes exploded across the surface. Silverware clattered to the ground, and the entire cafeteria, all 200 soldiers, went absolutely silent. "Next time," Harlan snarled, standing over her with his fists clenched. "You answer when a superior officer talks to you." For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Half the soldiers were frozen in shock. The other half were probably thinking the same thing. This guy just ended his career and he doesn't even know it yet. But then she moved. Not frantically. Not with panic or fear. She just lay there for a second, breathing evenly, like she was deciding how to handle this. Then she sat up slowly, brushed a bit of food off her sleeve, and looked up at him with eyes that could freeze lava. "Are you done, Captain?" Her voice was cold, clinical, the kind of voice that makes your survival instincts scream at you to back away slowly. Harlan must have felt it too, because for the first time, his confidence flickered. He took a small step back, almost involuntarily. Something about her wasn't adding up. She should have been embarrassed, angry, crying, anything. But instead, she looked at him like he was a problem she'd already solved. She reached into her vest pocket. Half the room tensed. A few soldiers actually stood up, expecting a fight to break out. But what she pulled out wasn't a weapon. It was a badge, black leather, folded, official looking. She flipped it open with one practiced motion, and the gold insignia inside caught the fluorescent lights. For a split second, nobody could make out what it was. Then, someone near the front gasped. The emblem was unmistakable. An eagle clutching a trident and an anchor. Anyone with even basic military knowledge knew what that meant. That was a seal insignia terreal deal. The whispers started immediately. "Wait, is that what I think it is? No way. That's impossible." "She's a SEAL. An actual SEAL." One lieutenant literally dropped his coffee mug. It shattered on the floor, but nobody even looked at it. All eyes were glued to that badge. Harlan's face went through about 5 different emotions in 3 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, horror, and finally, the sickening realization of what he'd just done. "That's impossible," he stammered, his voice cracking. "We don't have any female... ... Say, stood up." And suddenly, even though she was smaller than him, even though she'd just been thrown onto a table like a rag doll, she looked 10 feet tall. "Correction, Captain," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut steel. "You didn't." Until now, every soldier within earshot straightened unconsciously. The entire cafeteria's energy shifted. These were trained military personnel, people who'd been through hell and back, and they were all standing at attention for someone they'd never even seen before, because they knew what that badge meant. They knew what someone had to go through to earn it, and more importantly, they knew that Captain Harlan had just assaulted a superior officer in front of hundreds of witnesses. Harlan's mouth opened and closed like a fish, drowning on dry land. His face had gone from red to white to a sickly green. He looked like a man who'd just realized he was standing on a landmine. She adjusted her sleeve calmly, picked up her tray from where it had fallen, and looked him dead in the eye. "Next time, Captain, maybe ask before you throw someone across a table." Then she walked away. "Who's like that? Composed, untouchable." She sat down at that same corner table and started eating her lunch like absolutely nothing had happened. The only sound in the entire cafeteria was the collective hell breath of 200 soldiers trying not to make any noise that might draw attention to themselves. But the story doesn't end there. No. Because while she was sitting there eating her now-cold meal, Captain Harlan was still standing in the middle of the room, trying to figure out how to salvage his career. He tried to laugh it off. "All right, joke's over," he said, but his voice was shaking. "You think flashing some fancy badge makes you special. Who authorized your presence here anyway? Big mistake. Huge." She didn't even look at him, just reached into another pocket, pulled out a small black card, and slid it across the table toward him. Command did. He picked it up, frowning. It wasn't a regular military ID. This thing was embossed, sealed, and stamped with red letters. Confidential, red clearance. Then he saw the clearance code, JSOC Alpha. Joint Special Operations Command. The highest level of military intelligence clearance. The kind of clearance that means you've been places and done things that don't officially exist. The card fell from his fingers. Before he could even begin to process what that meant, the cafeteria doors exploded open. 2 military police officers strode in, followed by someone who made even the MPs look nervous. Rear Admiral Weston, head of Special Operations Oversight, a man who could end careers with a single phone call. The entire room snapped to attention so fast, it sounded like a thunderclap. "At ease," Weston ordered, but his voice carried zero calm. His eyes swept the cafeteria before landing on the woman sitting quietly in the corner. "Lieutenant Commander Rains," he said, his tone measured but tight. "We weren't expecting you until tomorrow." She stood smoothly, giving a respectful nod. "Plans changed, Admiral. I thought I'd get a sense of the team's morale." Her eyes flicked toward Harlan, who looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. "I've learned a lot already," she added. Weston's jaw tightened. "I'm sure you have." Then he turned to face Harlan, and the temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. "Captain," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of an avalanche, "you laid hands on a superior officer." Harlan swallowed hard. "Sir, there was a misunderstanding. I didn't know she was... ... That's the point," Weston cut him off, his voice dropping like thunder. "You didn't ask. You assumed." Every soldier in that room wanted to disappear. Some were probably calculating how quickly they could transfer to a different base before they got caught in the fallout. But then Rains stepped forward. "It's fine, Admiral. Lesson learned for everyone." She walked closer to Harlan, close enough that he could see a small scar on her temple. The kind of scar you don't get from training exercises. The kind that comes from real combat, from situations where one wrong move means you don't come home. "Next time you meet someone new, Captain," she said quietly, "remember that rank doesn't always wear stripes where you can see them." Harlan could barely nod. "Yes, ma'am." She offered a faint, knowing smile. Then she turned back to the Admiral. "Permission to continue my assessment." "Gran," Weston said. Then he gave Harlan one last look that could have melted steel. "And Captain, pray she gives you a passing report." As the Admiral left, every soldier snapped to attention again. The MPs followed him out, leaving Harlan standing there, probably contemplating a career change. Raina simply sat back down and finished her meal in silence. For the first time in years, that cafeteria stayed completely quiet for the rest of the day. No jokes, no loud laughter, no bravado, just the sound of folks on trays and the occasional nervous cough. Because everyone in that room had just learned something valuable. They'd learned that assumptions can be dangerous. That ego can blind you. That the quietest person in the room might be the most dangerous one. And that sometimes, the people who've seen the worst of humanity carry it with grace instead of arrogance. As for Captain Harlan, word is he's a lot more careful about who he talks to these days. He asks questions first. He checks credentials. And he never, ever assumes he's the toughest person in any room. Because he learned the hard way that real warriors don't need to prove anything to anyone. They just show up, do their job, and let their actions speak for themselves. And that, my friends, is how one woman with a badge silenced an entire military base without raising her voice even once.